Jim Robinson, who writes about Central Florida history for the Orlando Sentinel and has also edited and published a couple of books on the topic, joins us now to discuss the early presence of African Americans in the state of Florida. Jim, thanks for joining me for the program.
Thank you.
Jim, give us kind of a picture of early African American existence in the state of Florida. When did the blacks first arrive at the state?
One of the things that most people don't understand is probably the blacks were some of the earliest people to arrive in Florida. They arrived with the Spanish explorers 400 years ago. And then when the Creeks and other tribes were leaving the American states when Florida was still part of Spain, blacks escaping slavery found a sanctuary in the Central Florida area, the St. Johns River. They could actually escape down the St. Johns River and live relatively free among the Seminoles.
So Florida would have probably been one of the early areas of freedom for African Americans.
Absolutely, and they had their own cultures. They, in somewhat, continued to practice their own religions, had their own villages, and become very much allies in the Seminoles' battle against the U.S. Army for freedom.
I understand they manned a fort at St. Augustine that had an interesting history when they arrived with the Spanish in Ponce de Leon.
Fort Wasay was settled on the outskirts of the fort. It was a black village, but they had their own militia, and when the fort was attacked, the early soldiers that were protecting the fort were the black militia. Okay.
I think a lot of people aren't aware that was probably why St. Augustine wasn't taken, one of the early cities that were taken.
Absolutely. And actually that culture is fascinating. The allies between those and some of the other tribes of Florida were the reason the United States was never able to defeat the Seminoles.
I guess we moved from there into an era of the Seminole Wars. And as a matter of fact, I understand that the name Seminole actually means runaway. It's
runaway, someone who was maybe falls off a ship and lives alone. In some cases, the Spanish had a word, cimarron, that was developed in the word Seminole, and they used it for people who escaped or lived away from civilization, the Seminoles.
Okay. General Andrew Jackson decided to attack the Seminole Nation in order to have the slaves returned to their owners, partly. That set off, what, 4
decades of war in Florida, early 1800s until the middle 1800s, 3 different wars.
Okay, why did it take 3 wars? I mean, what was the problem? Why couldn't you think, with the power and the might of the United States, they'd be able to come and crush a few Indians and African Americans?
The African Americans and the Seminoles fought much the way the Vietnamese fought the United States. It was an attack and retreat. There was never one particular leader, so the Americans never were able to capture all of the Seminoles.
There was a particular character by the name of Osceola, and it was not a chief. You just informed me before we went into taping that actually he was just Osceola, and the chiefs were a lineage amongst the Seminoles. Tell me a little bit about Osceola.
Osceola built himself. He grew into a leader, but he wasn't a bloodline chief. Osceola's family were part African, they were part British, and they were part Creek. When they came to Florida seeking sanctuary, his name was actually Billy Powell. His father was a British soldier. I'm sorry, a British merchant, trader. And he grew into to manhood and adopted a different name, Osceola, which means the black crier, black drink crier.
Which is part of a ceremony, I understand, that the Seminoles...
He would drink this concoction.
Why was Osceola so famous? What made him such a key figure? I understand he was visited when he was on his deathbed at the age of 36. He was visited by
many people. He was very influential.
Celebrity.
Yeah, he was very loyal to the African Americans who had joined them, and more than anyone else, he was able to motivate the Seminoles to continue their fight against the U.S. Army.
Okay, and of course we have Osceola County, so named because of his great work there. Briefly, Martin, was it Powell, founder of black churches in Oviedo, in the Oviedo area.
Martin Powell was a black slave who worked for George Powell. And when George Powell brought his family to Oviedo after the Civil War, Martin came with him and lived among the family. When George was a Baptist minister, when he started his church, Martin started another church, the Oviedo's Antioch Missionary Baptist Church.
Okay, well, good. Jim, thanks for joining us and giving us just a little snapshot of what life was like in the early Florida for African Americans. Thanks.